You're all set?
Yes.
Yes.
And
Got it?
doing this.
Audio,
The output.
check,
Slow.
check, roll it. Roll it.
All right.
Take one. Take one, Ken McClelland.
All right. There's not only a theme here about simulations tonight, but there's been a lot of talk today about interactions of independent control systems, and that's my main theme for this particular session. What I've been trying to do is model situations in which two control systems use the same environmental variable. Now I'm doing that because I'm eventually working toward trying to model what happens when humans inhabit the same environment. And what can happen under those circumstances. And I'm starting out just as simply as I can to get a notion of what are the basic patterns of interaction that we might encounter when two control systems have to share an environment. Now, my very first figure here starts with just a single control system controlling a single variable. This is very basic, and the objective here is to give us a pattern that we can recognize, and I'm going to try to reproduce this pattern when I get to more complicated combinations of systems. And so what's happening here is that this single control system has let me go through my little thing over here. This is a disturbance. The disturbance is down here. It's just a constant disturbance of -10. And it happens, it's applied right at this step. The disturbance happens right here at 0 the first time. Everything is at 0 before this. So we're starting with the disturbance, a sudden pull in the -10 direction. What happens? What's the other things we have here? A reference value that's 0 the whole way through, so that you can. All right. We have a perceptual variable, and this is this curve right here. And for instance, at the very first iteration, it gets immediately jerked down to -10 by the disturbance that's been applied to this system. And this top curve is the output of the system. And so at the first iteration, as soon as the system perceives that the previously controlled variable has gone, the error here we can just read is the difference between this 0 and wherever this curve happens to be. It suddenly has a -10 error. It immediately starts to correct that error by output in the opposite direction, and rapidly gets it into control about there. Brings it back to a 0. Any questions on this?
So you pull one side of the rubber band, right, and pull it 10.
Yeah.
And
The experimenter has just pulled it way over, and it just leaves it right there, and then the control system immediately recovers, or begins to recover.
And that line is keeping it in the middle of the circle.
What kind of an experiment was it? I mean, what kind of a...
This is simply a mathematical simulation of whatever happens to the generic control system.
Okay, fine, okay.
It's right off the shelf. It's got a gain of 100. It needs a slowing factor, and that's 0.005. Okay. Any more questions on this? This is simply for comparison purposes, and we'll go back to this in a minute. The first thing I did was give two control systems that same task. Attach them to that same variable with that same disturbance. And I played around with this in various places, various times, various combinations, and found that control systems with a gain that's just half of the previous gain, a gain of 50, two of them with gain of 50, produced a perceptual variable that was exactly the same as I had gotten with a single control system of gain 100.
And you get two people on the same end of the rubber band.
Yeah, there are two people pulling together, and this is where the physics of it get a little complicated, because they're perfectly cooperating in this case, in the same pulling together in a beautifully coordinated fashion. Each one of them has a little piece of the rubber band.
Is this the mathematical simulation?
Yes.
This is mathematical simulation. And each of them only has to pull 5 words, not 10 words.
Where and how are they coupled?
They're coupled through their monitoring of this environmental variable. They're coupled because they're both perceiving the same environmental variable. That's the only way that they're coupled.
Did I understand that this is a mathematical simulation? Is the environmental variable part of the simulation?
Yeah, the environmental variable would show up here as a curve that's exactly the same as this perceptual curve, just one iteration to the left, and I didn't show it on this because it muddied things up.
So they're both operating off the same perceptual variable, controllable variable.
Right.
And they are independently then perceiving that and independently producing their outputs.
Yes, and when they independently produce their outputs that are applied to that environmental variable, they only have to each pull 5. The two curves are superimposed here because they're producing identical responses, or identical outputs.
Did you select this gain by...
I tried various things, and a 50-50, giving them both 50, produced a 1.00 correlation with the previous. This curve is identical to the curve that you just saw. Am I okay so far?
Yeah. Are the two outputs interconnected in some manner?
Yes, they're both. The environmental variable is the disturbance plus output 1 plus output 2.
Okay, that's what I was looking for.
So here is perfect cooperation presumed. Okay. So I tried it with other combinations, and I found that any combination of gains that added up to 100 gave me the same perceptual curve. So here's a case of gain 75 and 25, and the system with gain 75 pulls 7.5 units roughly, and the system with gain 25 pulls 2.5 units.
So if your partner is super sensitive, you don't need to be.
Yeah. If your partner's quicker to react to something, you can low.
But these two, they both have, in a sense, unlimited strength. It's just the loop gain that you're playing with.
Yeah.
It's just how fussy they are. You should think of it as being one stronger than the other. Think of one as being fussier than the other.
Right. One's quicker to respond to the...
More sensitive to error.
More sensitive to the error.
It wouldn't be like two people pedaling a bicycle, one in front, one in back. It wouldn't be that way.
Well, they have different gear ratios.
they have different gear ratios that would.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Other question?
We change gear ratios so both of them.
If you give the stronger person the big sprocket.
Okay.
All of these comments just illustrate the fact that loop gain is the sum or product of all the various amplification factors around the loop. We have different names for them depending on where we talk about it in the loop.
Okay. So the first principle I found then was a kind of additivity of gain, that when you put systems together, the gains tend to add up, and two systems can produce the same environmental effect and the same thing to be perceived as a single system can. Okay. The second thing I tried was starting from different starts. Here, one of the systems, they have identical gains. Now they're back to 50-50. Everything's identical. Their reference values are still 0. But this first, it just happens that when I began this particular run, one of them was already pulling 1 unit in the positive direction, and the other was already pulling 1 unit in the negative direction. Okay, I just set it up to be, I don't know what this, I'm not quite sure what this has to do with reality, but just assume that you've got outputs that can be different to begin with. Perhaps they had just been, we could imagine here that they had been both controlling their perception for a 0, but one was pulling with the balanced pull in either direction. Okay, the disturbance comes along, they immediately go up to 4 and 6, roughly, to take care of the disturbance. But then, as they're pulling there, as it wears along, there's a gradual convergence of the output, which was unexpected. This is not what I expected to see exactly. Lots of things about these little experiments surprise me. And here we have, I call it equilibration. They're beginning to, they're eventually, if we pushed this, if we didn't have just 40 but had 400 repetitions, they'd be pretty close to 5 and 5.
Because the gain factors are the same.
The gain factors are the same.
Well, they both have the same reference though.
They both have the same
So
reference.
they should be tending to each, tend toward the whatever conditions required to match their each separate reference. So they
That's true. But because of the feedback, the error is getting so small that there's very little tendency to bring them together. So they come together very, very slowly compared to their real time constants. I suppose eventually they would come together. If these were slightly leaky integrators, they would come together much more rapidly.
Okay.
Well, if you kept the disturbance applied all the time.
It is applied all
Yeah,
the
the
time.
disturbance is here. The disturbance is constant in all
Remember, the
these
disturbance
cases.
goes -10 and stays there.
This is the disturbance.
Oh, yes,
Right.
yes.
Okay.
It could also be, you've got to watch out for computational artifacts here.
Yeah, I'm
It could also
concerned
be
about
that
this.
these are not perfect integrators, as you assume. If they were perfect integrators, those two curves might just come to a parallel asymptotes.
Yeah, I'm wondering about this, but this is what I got, and
Now, don't worry about little effects like this, because there's too many other possible explanations. They're more trouble than they're worth to track down.
okay. Well, let's go to a big effect.
Yeah.
The next thing I tried was giving them different reference values, plus 0.5 and minus 0.5. It's not very different. And in this case, this is a little different from the previous ones you've seen because I didn't apply any disturbance to this. I just let it be a zero disturbance. So they're operating under optimum conditions here. No disturbances. They start from zero. They've got, here's the reference value. This top black line is the reference value of the one, and here's the reference value of the other. And from zero, they start, this is a tug of war.
Right.
They're disturbing each other. This, the black system wants to pull it up, the white system wants to pull it down. They're perfectly balanced. They can't get anywhere. This will convert, this will diverge till they hit the limits of whatever their output is.
Such that they're in opposition. I'm trying how to think about this, whether it's a computer program, an analog computer. I don't know how.
This is like an emulation of an analog computer.
Well, all right. So with an analog computer, you have some kind of an adder somewhere on the output end somewhere.
Yeah.
So that those are being added.
Yes.
Okay. That I can understand.
Yeah.
This is very simply the rubber band experiment in conflict. Only the two people are pulling apart. Only your rubber bands don't break, and you're not afraid of snapping your fingers.
Yeah, right.
People are keeping the knot at two slightly different references.
Well, they're trying. And they're keeping it perfectly at zero.
They've got two different references.
Right, right. So it's very much like that last demo in your you know, they're just looking at it slightly differently, and it's just enough. In the last conflict thing in your
The next to that conflict thing has
Yeah.
two different targets,
Right.
and they pulled apart, which is precisely what you're doing.
okay. So this is classic conflict, plain vanilla. Okay. I tried. Oops, got this upside down. I tried reducing the conflict and seeing what would happen, making the conflict go away. So arbitrarily, halfway through the run on this particular one, they converge. They give up their tug of war. What happens? They still fight.
They stay in balance because there's no errors. There's no errors.
There's no error. So they are given the slow equilibration that my program is producing here. They'll slowly get back to zero someday, maybe long in the future. But there's no error, so they just they're just hung up at that point.
They changed the reference signal from one from positive 1 to 0 and the other from negative 1 to 0
Yeah.
at that point.
At that point, right there, boom. And they stop diverging, all right, but they don't converge.
This is a change in the reference signals, not in the outputs.
That's right.
From an output standpoint, they're still essentially in conflict, but they've got the same reference,
Right.
so the conflict doesn't matter.
So they bring the error to zero, so there's nothing left to make them stop fighting each other.
Okay. All right. Now, what happens when we apply a disturbance to this? System. Now I'm not changing the reference values on this one. I'm back to what I had a couple slides ago, but this time I've applied this disturbance of -10 to it, and they're conflicting. By gum. They're going out. They're diverging real quick there. They both at the beginning when they see that there's a problem. Aren't I anthropomorphizing really wonderfully here? They both start pulling in the same direction, but once they get it back into control, then great divergence. But they've got it in control this curve is correlated 1.00 with all of the others that we've looked at. Yeah.
Now imagine if in your program you had put in a limit of +8, that's the maximum output that upper system could produce.
Then I get the one that's sort of like that.
Sorry, okay, I'm jumping ahead.
Yeah, but as long as they don't hit their limits, conflict is taking place, clearly, but control is taking place just as if it were from the point of view of the observer of the variable, the external variable. This is control.
But if the disturbance hasn't changed, then you get into, you've done that too, I guess.
No, those still
That's still control?
Yeah. We can do
Disturbance is constant throughout.
Here, but if it works.
Oh, you want to see the disturbance changing? Okay.
No, leave that up
Leave
there.
that up there for a minute.
Okay.
Wayne is here, he wants to figure this out.
Whose perception, that's
It's both systems' perceptions of which are identical. I've given them a 1.0.
the one wants 0.5, the other one wants
Yeah.
minus 0.5.
Right. The first one wants this, the other one wants that. They get 0, or roughly 0.
It'd be interesting if you used different reference levels. If they were reference levels were far apart, after an initial transition period, they would still balance out, even though the reference levels were far apart.
Yes,
There will be a
something else will happen after a while.
Well, sure.
The further apart the reference levels, the faster the divergence takes place.
Right. The divergence is really being caused by the fact that the control variable is at neither reference level.
Right.
All right. You notice this system here is back down to 0 now, but if we kept this going, this system would soon be below 0, pulling.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't want to take this bit too grossly, but I can see this in like different groups that are like, let's say, radical, and they both have achieved like what looks to maybe an outsider as a common goal, but then they kind of like splinter off, and you don't see the difference reference that there is until it gets so close. Then there's that
Well,
That's a good point.
yeah. The thing that really struck me about this is until I did this, I was thinking of conflict and cooperation as totally incompatible. But it's not in a control system world.
I'm not following you. How does that demonstrate?
Well,
Where's the cooperation?
the two systems together are producing an external effect that's identical to that one system that we started with, or identical to the two cooperating systems that we started with earlier. The external effect is one of cooperation.
They're effectively opposing disturbance, but they're not doing it by doing the same thing.
They're doing it by conflicting with each other.
Now, one reason that this appears this way is that the disturbance is much, much larger than the difference between the reference levels.
Yeah, and as long and under those conditions, you're getting both cooperation in that sense
So they
conflict.
They can cooperate against the common enemy as long as the threat's big enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
At the same time, an outside observer who can only see the same perceptual variable, he can't tell the difference amongst these systems.
That's right. As somebody who's observing the output could tell that conflict was happening here.
But if this is part of applying the test, you may have got the correct perceptual variable, but you haven't got the rest of the system.
That's right, yeah. You pass one of the tests, one part of the test, but not the other part.
Now, what you said the divergence depends on
The distance between the reference values.
Okay.
Okay. The further apart the reference values, the faster the divergence. Okay.
It's probably an artifact of the integration, but it looks like after you hit the disturbance in the
white guy's direction, the return is closer to the white guy's reference in the end, right? I think that's a...
Well,
That may be computational.
that's a computation.
Is it a computational thing?
Yeah, because this correlates 1.0 with the earlier ones, and the single system by itself doesn't pull it all the way up to 0. It pulls it up till a very small difference from 0, slightly below 0, and this is doing exactly the same thing. Okay. All right. You want to see a more complicated disturbance?
Yeah,
Here we go.
I do.
This is complicated. Okay, this is going to take a little while to sort this one out. Here's the disturbance. The disturbance now is a smooth random disturbance. Okay.
Applied to both systems.
Applied to their common environmental variable.
Okay.
Oh, I see.
Okay. The two systems have two different reference values. In this case, it's plus 0.5 and minus 1.5. The two systems have two different gains. One's 75, the other's 25. The outputs have started at different places, minus 5 and plus 5.
Sounds like a classic husband and wife situation.
Okay, and here's the perceptual look at this perceptual variable. First, the application of the disturbance pulls it way outside both reference levels, and the one with the higher gain, this black one has a higher gain. It pulls back real hard, real fast. We sort of, we're keeping reasonable control there, but this is a pretty fast-changing disturbance for these systems, so it controls okay, given that the disturbance is changing so fast. And you notice that the one system starts pulling way off in that direction, the other system keeps pulling way off in this, or starts going down there. They're both responding in some sense to this snaky pattern of the disturbance.
It kind of looks good by good control if you compare it to just the band between the references.
Yeah.
But if you measured the variance of the disturbance relative to the variance of the perception, I think you find that the control is actually quite poor relative to a non-conflicting control.
That's largely because of the speed of the disturbance, though. If the disturbance were a lot slower, it would be coming to a...
All right, well, let's ask ourselves whether this is good control or bad control by taking a look at this one. Here's a single system with 100, gain 100, with a 0 reference level, and this curve, if you recall, is identical to the curve that I just showed you.
Oh, really? I was wrong. So that's the disturbance and output of a single system.
Of a single system. This is we're used to this kind of a diagram. We've seen this many times before.
But the amount of energy used up here, I mean, is that relevant?
Well, I know it wore me out entirely to try to do all this stuff.
You're wearing him out with your questions there.
No, I like this.
Well, if you made the gain fall according to the amount of effort expended so far.
Oh, that's an interesting wrinkle.
Unlimited power.
In other words, it gets tired.
So the control of that perception, from an outsider's perspective, that variable is being controlled by a single system as well as those two conflicted systems.
No, there's only one system.
I know this one's one system.
Let me
That's the two systems.
superimpose those two.
Does it make a difference if the two systems have the relative gain of the two systems and stuff like that? Or?
Well, the gains have to add to 100.
Oh, okay. So the gain adds to the single system gain.
Yeah,
Right.
gain adds to the single system gain.
And
All
the
the
references are just different. They're just to any.
well, now the references had to be picked very carefully to make it come out the same. You notice the references were one was
Oh, so they were
+0.5.
equally on
+0.5.
either side.
One reference is off by 3 times the amount of the other reference.
So
supposed to make up the 3-1 gain.
They're equal on each
all right,
side.
all right, I see.
They're equal on each side, right?
Well, it's proportional to gain on each
Proportional
side.
gain, right.
The gain reference product is constant.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so the lesson is that two conflicted systems, if properly reference leveled and gain.
Well,
And
any two conflicted systems, as long as they're operating within their limits, can be reproduced by a single system.
Okay.
The output there.
The
output, but
is waste energy.
So it's still subject to the limits that we
Still-
have to add up and the rest of it.
Still subject.
That's your output, John.
Could you take the liberty of interpreting this as one person who looks normal on the outside, but is actually struggling with conflicting internal goals and internally exhausting themselves?
I would think so. I think this is for any two same level control systems. I don't know.
I told you that in confidence.
Don't take this personal, Bill.
Okay.
What was that last one you put up?
Well, I was just showing you the spaghetti that we've looked at before. Here's another complicated one that shows us what happens when there are limits on output. Limits on output. The limits are 10 and minus 10. Okay, and both systems are subject to those same limits of 10 and minus 10. Okay, the disturbance looks different here. For the purposes of this one, I have a disturbance that's rather small and stays within more or less within the limits of their reference levels, which are rather different, +2 and -2. And so it's a triangular disturbance. And this is the perceptual, this is what they see perceptually happening. This it turns out to here about, that's pretty good control. Okay, so these they're conflicting systems, but as long as they're not outside their, they haven't hit their limits of output, their control is just fine. At this point, limit of output, and suddenly the control just goes nowhere. The external variable that they're perceiving starts tracking the disturbance.
No resistance at all.
It actually goes above the reference level of the top one.
Yeah. And you notice when it does that, when it goes above the reference level, there's a little dip up there where that one's starting to control again.
Then it goes down.
And then it goes down here, and there's a little bump there where that one's starting to control again.
Beautiful. Just perfect.
Okay, and
If only one of them did so.
well, only one of
Love this trip? Pardon me? Don't you love it? I love it, yeah.
here's a case where one of them has already hit the limit, and this other one hasn't. Okay, and because the disturbance is helping this one in this region, and you notice that it starts pulling it down toward its own the white system starts pulling it down toward its own reference level until it hits its limit, and then it's all over. Okay, and here's the comparison for this. This is what happens with a single system with a zero, given this same triangular disturbance. So the first half of this, I guess we can compare them sort of like that. The first half of this has the same up until about here. Control stops about here, and then it starts just tracking the disturbance.
But isn't the control still within the bands?
it can't go too
Yeah,
far
yeah,
out.
yeah, it's holding it within, it's holding it within the disputed area, as Bill says.
Okay.
The two are holding it within the disputed area.
Yeah, but between those limits, there is no control. That's
Yeah.
the dead zone.
The dead zone is the term you use. Well, there's no control. They're just tracking the disturbance.
When they're limited, that's what, the dead zone exists only when they're limited.
Yeah, but those little bumps he showed you, that shows what happens when a stranger comes in and tries to take one side or the other in a conflict. He aids one side, and that side all of a sudden begins to relax, opposing the effect of his aid. And if he does it the other way, the other guy resists. So this is what happens when you step in the middle of a family fight.
That's why police don't like to go on these families.
The dead zone.
This is great stuff. Go on.
Well, I'm out of gas. I've done it all.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So, well, you know, some of this seemed to me had some, you know, I have to start extrapolating a long way, but conflict and control going on simultaneously? Yeah, that seems to happen a lot. Things have to be perfectly aligned if you're going to have cooperation, but that doesn't happen a lot, I imagine. So it seems like there are a lot, you can follow this towards some conclusions about real interaction.
But you do have some leeway, because if the gains don't happen to add up to exactly 100, like they add up to 50, then you'll get the same effects, but as if you had a control system of half the gain.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And let me emphasize that these things I've just shown you are very, you know, very simplified, very oversimplified. There's lots of other things one might do with it. Might change reference values in various ways. One might have different functions for perceptual input and output, you know, apply functions to the input and output. You might, well, there's a whole host of
That
things.
shows that you can have cooperation and conflict at the same time, even from people who are from their own point of view in the system, they're cooperating in a conflictual way. Certainly people from the outside won't see any conflict going on.
Yeah.
Except unless they look at the outputs.
It's a family that blows up and, oh, they were just fine. I didn't think they had any.
Yeah. Well, stability can be maintained in a conflictual system for a long time until everybody hits their output limits.
I've been seeing something like this with a group of 6 people, where they were not properly balanced out. And this, you could have seen all of these different kinds of interactions as one or the other in his limits, or that one helped the other, the whole bit. It finally got solved because one of them got drunk and was forced to resign from the committee.
That's a new way of solving conflict.
I've got this program working on Frank's PowerBook, and so if you have other things that you'd like to see tried, I'll be more than happy to, tomorrow afternoon, I'll be more than happy to do it. So,
Can we take a break, John?
Yeah.
Take a break?
Take a break. It's only